Hello there, and welcome to Weird Music on the Glumberger channel. The show where we look at all sorts of different albums of all many different kinds, right? I don't know, I feel like this whole show, it's a bit of a kaleidoscope of nonsense, right? Anyway, today, of course, is a return to the randomizer. So today's episode request comes from none other than long-time channel supporter, CatHORSE. So very glad to finally be discussing one of their requests, actually. So for today's episode, CatHORSE has requested we take a look into the world of Frippertronics, the weird guitar tape delay method by Robert Fripp, originally conceived with the help of the one and only Brian Eno. So, I'm no stranger to Frippertronics. My introduction to the star was the amazing album No Pussyfooting, the collaborative album by Fripp and Eno, of course. I have heard a few other works, though, within this, I guess you can call it a genre, right? Sort of like Fripp's contributions to various recordings, with like the likes of David Bowie, for example, and stuff, as well as the other Fripp and Eno albums. Why do I mention this, though? It's because this album is actually not something I had ever come across until it was suggested. This is just pure, raw solo Frippertronics and nothing more. Yep, it's exactly what Frippertronics does when it is in action, and that's all we get on this album. And it makes for a really exciting and fascinating album experience. Very excited to talk about this one because it is such a trip of an album to dive into. So without further ado, I present Let the Power Fall by Robert Fripp. So of course, who is Robert Fripp then? Well, probably needs no real introduction, but Robert Fripp is an English musician, composer, record producer, author, and of course, guitarist. Known most for being the founder and the longest lasting member of the amazing progressive rock band King Crimson. As well as this, Fripp has also worked as a session musician, working with many notable figures such as Bowie, Brian Eno, Peter Gabriel, Blondie, Talking Heads, and so many more as well. Fripp's work expands so far and wide beyond just the progressive rock genre that he helped spearhead with King Crimson, but also into territories of pop, rock, classical, and even ambient soundscapes. So, it's probably worth asking then, what is Frippertronics? Well, Frippertronics is a tape looping technique used by Robert Fripp, of course. This unusual technique involves the utilization of two side-by-side reel-to-reel tape recorders. And from my basic understanding, the setup involves taking the two reel-to-reel tape recorders, configuring it so that the tape travels from the supply reel of the first machine to the take-up reel of the second machine, allowing sounds to be recorded on that first machine, then played back on the second machine, before it's then all rerouted back to the first machine, causing a delay signal, by which time you're already recording new sounds on top of it. This allows Fripp to essentially continually add new sound layers atop one another, with the oldest instances of sound slowly decaying over time, creating these hypnotically long looping soundscapes. So, as mentioned, the technique was first developed during the No Pussyfooting recording sessions with Brian Eno, when Eno introduced this to Fripp in his own home studios, essentially combining Fripp's guitar performances with the two-machine tape delay. Incredibly cool stuff, but so much of it goes over my head in terms of the science behind it all, but I'm sure some of you know a bit more about it, so if you do, let us know more about it in the comments. So of course, yes, today we're reviewing Let the Power Fall, a very strange album comprising some Frippertronic jams sourced from a 1979 tour. So interestingly, this album comprises one of the few full studio albums to feature only Frippertronics and nothing else. Most other uses of Frippertronics were utilised in collaborations, for example, and session performances for various artists. But here though, pure, unfiltered, raw Frippertronics and nothing more though. All sourced from that solo 1979 tour through North America of small venues. 6 tracks, all titled 1984 to 1989. Little weird, but I think with the kind of overly futuristic sound that Fripp naturally produces with this style, this sequence of titles kind of makes a little bit of sense, I feel. A little bit amusing as well. Anyway, so as mentioned prior to the suggestion of this by CatHORSE, I had never come across this album. I mean, I had of course heard No Pussyfooting, which is one of my favourite experimental albums, which I do own a physical copy of here, and I've been meaning to review this one, but I've just never gotten around to it. But the randomizer got there first with the suggestion of Let the Power Fall, so we're going to start here instead. But I have to say, this album is an absolute delight, so let's dive in. So opening up with 1984, this one introduces us to the whole album with an occurrence of a high-pitched resonating note, one that seems to be immediately caught in that unusual looping effect as it pings out across the length of the tape, travelling from the reel right over to the other side and starting the succession of loops over and over. This is of course classic Frippertronics, and it all results in music that feels so wonderfully otherworldly and ethereal. The result of Fripp just improvising and in creating these incredibly wonderful and unusual soundscapes. Like, it's something distinctly ambient, I find. Very textural and oddly synthetic as well. Just the most unusual of droning guitar music. But I've always been a fan of this though. It's a very, and I do think as well, hearing it here, it's a very cool album that just highlights, just how Frippertronics works and what makes it such a fascinating style, I guess, or genre. It's hard to know. With this one as well, it's quite intense and overwhelming. But there is this amazing physical effect you get that comes from the music, of the way it just loops in, around and over itself, travelling these unusual tapes of effects into just pure abstraction, it feels. Like it's slowly just getting lost in the rising and decaying music, something that's even taken singular notes and then transformed them into these stretched out ambient layers. Very cool, and I enjoy the tone that Fripp is achieving on this one though, Like, once your mind settles down in amongst the abstraction of the guitar, it just ends up being this incredibly hypnotising and zonked out experience though. And I always find it very difficult to kind of explain it, and especially explain the effects of how I feel when I listen to Frippertronics. But it just seems to tap into that part of me that just adores the pure abstraction of expression of loops, as well as just creating these oddly pleasing tones as a result. One that pings in across the spectrum of hearing as Fripp just noodles away, creating such an abstraction of perfect musical notes. Very weird, but I love the vibe that this one gives off. A perfect little performance to get us in the mood for some very weird hypnotising music. Get comfy, because there's going to be so much more of these. So looking at the next track, 1985. So this one opens up a lot more nicely with this strange loop of that synthetic tone being achieved once again through the active Frippertronics, before suddenly acting like what feels like rain trickling down the leaves. It reminds me of a super slow version of the rainstorm from the movie Bambi for some reason. I don't know why, it's where my mind wandered off to when I heard it. Pretty sure I've already used footage of that in another video as well before, but heck, let's use it again, why not? Do different things with it maybe. But yes, this is just much more of what you'd expect from Fripp on this one. This one does unfold so wonderfully into just this lovely bed of ambience though. One that I feel is a little bit oddly interrupted by the strange presence of very odd notes though here and there, playing a very weird pattern that just Fripp knows how to do, right? That weird esoteric style he has of just travelling all and up and down the guitar. But especially with the sort of denser drone that comes in, it creates for us this sonically fascinating little musical section that feels so atypical of Frippertronics, but it's easily just a delight to experience and listen to. And I love the way the notes are just pinging around the headphones constantly, all these different musical abstractions building up this ambient bed. Very cool, and it's exactly what you'd expect, right? Hard to fault. And it's all just so expertly achieved though by Fripp, just continuing to just build up and up, sometimes delving into sort of what feels like noisy distortion, but still being something that's fascinating to hear. Like, I definitely like it, and it just feels so loose and freeform from Fripp. You know, the effects of this strange form of playing the guitar and the effects of it, just creating this wonderful music that results like this. Like, it almost feels like a little bit that it doesn't matter what Fripp does when he's playing the instrument, but it obviously does matter, of course. Like, he does play like these actual melodies of sort, but they become so strange in this ambient form. I mean, I don't know much about it, but considering his background as just being an expert guitar player, I do wonder if he's playing like some sort of like weirdly timed modal stuff. Like, I don't know much about that kind of thing. It always goes right over my head. But, with Fripp's absurd knowledge of instruments, time signatures and keys as well and stuff like that, it wouldn't surprise me if he was playing some variation on something. But whatever it is, it just results in some thick sounding droning soundscapes. And I just think it's very cool, whatever the heck it is. So moving right along, we get to 1986. A strange pulse of drones that loops over and over, of course, falling into strangely timed moments of just unusual abstraction again. Like them all, so strangely hypnotising once again. Difficult to comprehend and pay attention to the details of, as the music is just so tonally strange, and then being so ambient and stuff, it just stretches your perception of it into something so unusual and weird. But it's always what's cool about Fripp's approach to the music of this style. Knowing what a virtuoso he is on guitar, it just makes this particular release so cool to listen to. Like, to expand upon it, the dude has played some incredibly awesome stuff over the many years, of course, right? And I love the work he does with the likes of King Crimson, as well as the collaborative albums of Brian Eno. But that particular album, though, as mentioned, I'd never come across this one before, but I think it's really cool having now listened to it as part of the for this episode of Weird Music. Like digging into it and stuff. It's just one of the coolest things I've been introduced to, I have to say. Even though it's not something that I ever came across in my discovery of Fripp's music, I just never noticed that this was a release for some reason. I guess I never checked out his solo stuff, did I? But it's interesting to me the fact that longtime channel supporter CatHORSE landed on this one in particular. Like, I don't know why. I think it's weird to have landed on this one for some reason. It's definitely a little bit off the beaten track from what we know Fripp has released, and like I said, not one I came across when I checked out Frippertronics. I'd only mostly heard the collaborations with Brian Eno, No Pussyfooting, of course. But his specific solo work, I never knew it was this cool, though, I mean, from the looks of it, it's very varied as well. He has a lot of different kinds of solo albums, but I didn't know there was one like this, and I'm really glad to have been introduced to it. Like, it's just so cool. And it makes sense as well, with Eno having helped Fripp develop the tools of Frippertronics, it's like, he helped conceive the idea for him just to allow Fripp to truly run with it in the coming years, utilising it all the many different projects, both solo and as a collaborator in this. And hearing this distilled version of it, though, this pure raw form of Frippertronics, I think it's amazing. And I'm so grateful for CatHORSE for suggesting this one, because it's so wonderfully cosmic and psychedelic, relaxing in this really weird, trippy way. So moving along to 1987, this one quickly establishes, a very densely layered, thick smorgasbord of Frippertronics again, right? But as this one is all building up into that abstraction once more, we suddenly get these very unusual gaps in the form of silence. It leaves behind these very unusual frequencies that whine out in against this empty backdrop before all of those loops come back in. And it then plays on very nicely, become this wonderful, unusual deluge of those synthetic sounding notes. And I can't help but just envision Fripp delighting in how the notes all sound when he sort of throws them into these heavier moments of distortion, the more that this one all progresses eventually. Distortion in the context of this very strange music, at least, though. I don't know if it's actual fuzz or distortion pedals. I don't know. I don't think so. But it just sounds it from probably the way that the tape makes it all sound, if that makes sense. But whatever it is, something about some of those layers just comes across as really dense and fuzzy on this one. And whilst the others feel a bit more synthetic as a result of the strange effects of composing the music, this one, like, just sounds a little bit different, which makes it very cool in my books. Like, it's another sonic overload of musical effects, and it's another one that just hypnotizes me like the entirety of the album, of course, right? But very little for me to actually say on the matter, because I'm just kind of unable to comprehend the effects that hypnotizing music like this has at times. Like, when I was writing down my thoughts, and listening to it though, I just felt so zonked out, so sleepy and tired and frazzled by the tones that Fripp was achieving, that it was very difficult to write more about it the more it was all progressing. But in spite of all that strangeness and, the unusual effect it was having, it was so fascinating to hear and really cool to experience, and I was just having a blast just getting lost within the music. So we move on to the penultimate track then, 1988. So another dense one, of course, another cosmic voyage into the unknown, once again full of these looping drones creating that sonic tapestry that the music creates. It's once again so ambient though, and I like how Fripp kind of makes this one become a little bit sadder and sadder as it all unfolds, like something that feels oddly emotional with its swell of notes and the decaying effect of it crumbling right before our very eyes. Like, it's a bit weird, because I don't know why this particular track had an emotional resonance to it. But I'm actually not surprised though. Like, ambient music has unusual emotional effects at times. And with a lot of this one, it was very fun and hypnotizing, but this one just really kind of felt a bit emotional to me. I mean, to sort of go on a bit, one of my favourite compositions from Fripp has always been the closing track to Evening Star, the 20-minute track of Index of Metals, which is a beautiful ambient composition that comes from the result of Eno and Fripp's experiments in music. And that track is so long, and there's something really beautifully gorgeous and emotional about it, And this particular performance, I don't know why, but I feel myself just really enjoying the kind of unusually sad nature that the particulars of the music has here. I think it's just the tones and notes that Fripp has opted for on this one. Like, maybe it was unintentional stuff, but it's just how it comes across to me as a listener, and I think it's very interesting as a result. Like, it's probably one of my favourites, just because of how Fripp has made it all sound to, this lovely development of swelling, droning layers and pure abstractions again. Oddly minimal in places, especially towards the end when the Fripp just lets the whole thing just slowly decay into silence. Like, what an amazing little composition to have found on a strange album, and for some reason, one of my favourites I've heard now. So we then move on to the final track here, 1989. A final long improvisation to bring the whole thing to a close. So once again, those roughly strewn dense layer of Frippertronics, rough abstraction that does that weird looping effect of falling back towards silence for a brief instance, and Fripp builds up upon it with stranger and stranger notes, creating a final unfolding experience that feels like, the generation of worlds almost, of like slowly fading in on a picture perhaps, and seeing more of the whole as that all occurs, And I think it's a nice one for this to end everything on though, as it's just delights in exploring the untethered creativity once again of improvisational pieces. I can see Fripp just having fun here though, making these cool little noodles on guitar, resulting in this wonderful music, of course. I think, like, it's interesting that, Fripp has documented all of these jams essentially in this very strange little release, As mentioned, all sourced from that 1979 tour of North America in small venues. Like, I have to say, it must have been so cool attending any one of these shows, right? Because everyone would be very different in of themselves, actually, Just the result of what muse Fripp was feeling on the day, following that, and creating the music as a result of his process, essentially. And I think it's amazing how it's all been documented here, on this particular album, for us to hear now as a result. Like, a strange abstract release of unusual music that feels so alien and futuristic. Especially with this track, it just feels super weird, I think. But I just adore it. Like, I think I'm really glad to be put into the direction of this one, this album, as I've mentioned though, because it's just been so delightful to hear, this cool documentation of how Fripp was experimenting during that particular year in music, and when it became to performing his style of Frippertronics. It's weird because, there's this weird sense of consistency across the whole album. Now, all of the performers offer up the peculiar tonal palette that Frippertronics offers, but then Fripp varies it ever so slightly across the track, making it all very interesting to listen to. And it results in something so cool sounding, you know? Something I delight and enjoy hearing, as it's just so bizarrely unique, yet incredibly hypnotising and so ambient. Like, this strange method of composing music that Fripp and Eno created, like, it just lets Fripp play his guitar like it was a synthesizer, which is so weird. It's incredibly cool stuff, and I'm actually very glad that the randomizer picked this one, because as it was actually, prior to starting the wheel on the show to actually sift through, the user suggestions for everyone, this was recommended prior to all that, and I actually bought this physical copy to eventually review it, and then never got around to it. Thanks ADHD, good work there. So I'm actually really glad that the randomizer picked it, because I was finally able to sit down, listen to it all, and I've just had so much fun experiencing it all, as a listener, but also as part of this show as well, because it's very fun diving into it all. It's a strange place to land in the world of Robert Fripp, but as a fan of so much of his work, I'm glad something like this exists, something that sounds so untethered and unhindered by the conventions of music itself, and just lets Fripp do his thing, whatever he wants to do. Amazing stuff, and so glad to have discussed it. And so to summarise, this is a fascinating little release from Fripp, right? As a huge fan of his collaborative efforts with Eno, it's actually very cool seeing it all here in the context of a solo performer, just hearing the raw style of Frippertronics and how it starts from the chewiest of notes and unfurls into these fantastic sprawling ambient compositions. And as well, as somebody who loves using delay pedals and loopers, my very poor approach to playing music does let me explore just the unwinding soundscape of improvisation. Like, it's not even remotely in the realms of Fripp, don't get me wrong. My pedals, primitive and digital, sound nowhere near as good as the analog effect that you have from Frippertronics, But I think, the reason why I've brought it up, though, it's because of that inherently analog element of Frippertronics, of that using actual tape and recording it in this live context, the more it all just unfurls and the more you just get these natural sounding effects of tape decay, it further transforms the music into something that is always ever shifting and changing with each passing second, that is so much more phenomenal than just classic looper pedals, I feel. Like, I'm just always in awe of how amazingly brilliant it sounds, always resulting in the most fascinating sounding guitar performances that sound nothing like a guitar, right? Very cool, and something I have a lot of time for, as you can imagine, right? So yeah, of course, I do extend my thanks to CatHORSE for specifically suggesting this one, though, as listening to it all unfold just made me want to look more and more into what's going on, into why this sounds the way it does, and it's just Frippertronics as well. No, on paper, it's simply the result of this experimental approach to guitar playing, just using the natural talent of being a virtuoso at the guitar to create the most sonic soundscapes across the course of these various performances. It's all so weird, but it's just perfect and brilliant to just experience and hear. To hear something that just sounds like this, right? Amazing stuff, and this certainly broadened my understanding of this incredibly unique approach to guitar, so yeah, truly pleased to have discussed it. So yeah, I think with that, we will be coming to the end of our episode of Weird Music there. How has it taken me this long to talk about Robert Fripp's music in some way or form? It's absolutely bizarre. Dude's been involved in some of my favourite albums of all time, and this was certainly not something I would have thought to have gone and checked out, but definitely glad to have discussed it. So yep, thank you CatHORSE for this one. Super cool to have this in my collection of music as well. Now, as mentioned, maybe we will discuss No Pussyfooting here. Maybe, we'll see. Maybe even a King Crimson album at some point. I've certainly wanted to, but whether we will ever get around to writing about it, who knows. Anyway, I would like to thank you for watching today's episode of Weird Music. Remember to recommend stuff. It will always be chucked up into the randomizer for future episodes. You never know, it might land on your suggestion. Anyway, I wish you all the best now. Take care, and bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.